So we just heard from the White House press secretary. She says that President Trump, who was nominated several times for the Nobel Peace Prize because of the Abraham Accords, left the Biden administration with nothing much more than what she called a dead-on-arrival plan for a two-state solution. What's your response to those comments?
Well, first of all, I think it's interesting. It's understandable to a degree that another administration is going to want to do things differently. Certainly, we've seen that. But when it comes to an entire region, you had the Trump administration, led by Jared Kushner, to put out an actual realistic peace proposal between Palestinians and between Israelis. Palestinians didn't engage in that. After that was over and Palestinians made clear that they were going to have nothing to do with peace talks, that was when Jared then approached the Gulf countries. And this is how we got to a normalization agreement, which was to say an entirely new viewpoint that hasn't been done before, where you approach things from the outside in. The idea that this administration has is apparently the old way of doing things, which is that the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is the center of all issues, that it's linked to everything, and somehow solving it will make everything in the Middle East better. And that's frankly not what reality shows. That was what the Trump administration saw and acted differently. That's how it led to the Abraham Accords.
And do you think the Abraham Accords will be able to survive this renewed conflict that we're seeing between Israel and the Palestinians, or I should say Hamas mostly at this point? Do you think the Abraham Accords will survive? Because I'm sure you've seen the headlines from the Washington Post and others, basically gleefully, hoping to see the downfall of the Abraham Accords. Do you think that's the case?
They will survive, and I'll explain why in a second. But first, let's understand why the administration does not want them to survive, at least in the same way. The administration currently, the Biden administration, believes in rebalancing ourselves, is hell-bent on getting back into the nuclear accord with Iran. Iran and its rise of influence throughout the region is one of the major factors that led to Arab states having a thaw in relations with Israel over the course of many years. So we're going to see at the end of this, the fact is, the Arab states, especially Gulf states, are realizing that if they did not want to have Palestinian politics, specifically from the Fatah side, hijack their foreign policies because they have their own national interests, then they're not going to allow Hamas to win with this victory that they will, of course, try to sell it as. They're not going to allow Hamas to now have a veto power over their national sovereignty. So the fact is, these accords, all of the fundamental reasons that the accords were made, all the economic factors, the people-to-people contacts, these are all strong and will remain so. These type of events in the Middle East are frankly the way the region works. That was the idea that something like this would happen was always there. It's still in Israel's interest and in the rest of the Arab world's interest to make sure that Iran doesn't have the gain and that Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood don't get to gain out of this.
And because we know, if you flash back just a couple of years, we saw John Kerry, for example, right before the Trump administration, everything we saw there with the Abraham Accords. And he was he just looking down his nose at the whole crowd. And he was saying how, well, of course, there'll be no peace in the Middle East. There'll be no agreement done without first making all these concessions to the Palestinians. But as you're explaining here now, it seems like you don't have to do that. You can actually embolden Israel and our allies in the region, and the rest falls into place. Is that really the new angle that the Trump administration brought to its view of the Middle East?
That's very true. That's new. And it's also a realization that the Trump administration also followed the law. I mean, the reason that the United States was allowing a PLO embassy to open, the reason that money was going to the Palestinians was so that they would engage in a peace process. Okay, it was based on a belief from '88 until the mid-'90s. Once the Oslo Accords were over and there have been more peace attempts and finally the Palestinian Authority refuses to negotiate, there is no need to continue to pay for them to spread their rationale and ideology, which is pretty anti-Israel and anti-Semitic. So they need to engage in a peace process if they would like to have the benefits from the United States. That's the way we have viewed things. And in the meantime, the rest of the region and the United States should be moving on.